Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Dr. Philip Fletcher, and welcome to another episode of the Humanity Matters weekly and podcast. This is where we discuss faith and philosophy, nonprofit leadership, and social issues. We want to engage in ideas on what it means to be a human being and to flourish as a human being. Hey, connect with me on my website, philipfletcher.org, philipfletcher.org. That would be a great way for you to connect with me and keep up with a lot of the things that are going on. And jump over to YouTube, the YouTube channel, and just look up my name, Philip Fletcher, and you'll see a lot of great content there as well. So jump over there, subscribe, watch, leave a comment. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Hey, it all goes a long way. Hey, do you listen to podcasts? I do. I like to work out with them. I like to wash dishes, chill out, listen to them. Hey, check out the Humanity Matters podcast, some different content than what you get over on here with me today. And you can look up Humanity Matters. You can find that on anchor.fm, anchor.fm, also on Spotify, Google, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast content. I would greatly appreciate it. Leave me a review. It helps out a lot. If you want to send an email, because I like email, hey, you may be participating in the mailbag and you may get something cool. So you can send me an email at humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. And then finally, hey, help me out. You know, want to be a sponsor? Hey, I'll run a commercial. I'll run an ad for you. Anything like that. You just want to drop $5, $10, $15, whatever. You can go to PayPal, pfletcher73@gmail.com. That is pfletcher73@gmail.com. I would greatly appreciate any type of help. It goes a long way in continuing to do these great things. So upcoming, I am so excited about some upcoming guests here in February and March. And first is Dr. Rachel Ferguson. Dr. Rachel Ferguson, she is the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center of the Hammond Institute, and she will be joining me. It'll be a 5 o'clock start, and that's going to be on Sunday, February 21st. That is Sunday, February 21st at 5 p.m. And we're going to talk a lot of good stuff about free enterprise, the Black community. Hey, what it's like to be an entrepreneur, that kind of great stuff. So check it out. That is going to be Sunday, February 21st, 2021. And if you have not liked that event, go over to my Facebook page, Dr. Philip Fletcher, and like that event and keep up with all the good stuff that will be coming for that. And then my friend, I met him in Fayetteville, Spike Cohen. He is the 2020, or he was the 2020 Libertarian vice presidential candidate. Yeah, big time stuff, right? And so he will be joining me on Sunday, March 14th, and that's going to be a great time. And so I'm sure he'll want to take questions and all of that good stuff. And so I look forward to that opportunity to talk with Mr. Cohen, learn about the ABCs of libertarianism. Maybe you want to know what that is, right? Most people know about Democrats, Republicans. What about libertarians, right? I think he would be a good guy to talk about that. And also we'll talk about just some of the lessons that he learned. Maybe you want to run for office, you know, get in that circus, right? Well, he can provide some good context, especially from a national level. So looking forward to those great interviews that are coming up. And I got some other great interviews coming as well. So once again, welcome to the Humanity Matters broadcast and podcast. I am your host, Dr. Philip Fletcher. Hey, if you want to send me an email me, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you want to jump in and leave a comment, we are broadcasting live on Facebook, but also over at YouTube. So if you want to jump on in, leave a comment. I love interaction. I love to provoke people with thought. And today is going to be one of those days. So the Arkansas legislature, right? Arkansas legislature, all right? They put out a bill. All right. This is their session. They have started meeting. I think they're in their third week, maybe. All right. And so House Representative Lowry, okay, he, along with Bentley, Ladyman, Lundstrom, Richmond, and Rye out of the Arkansas state rep side. So that would be the equivalent to our House of Representatives, United States Congress. So these are the House people, state reps here in the state of Arkansas. So they proposed a bill, HB1218. All right. And so that's the center in my discussion on today. And it was also sponsored by some state senators, to include Stubblefield, Johnson, Garner, and Rayford. Transparency, Rayford is my state senator for the area that I live in, Conway, Arkansas. Right. So the representatives, starting with Lowry, put forth this bill, HB 1218. Right. And this bill has caused a lot of brouhaha here in the state. Right. And so there's a title and there's a subtitle to this bill. Okay. And so the bill reads, and I quote, all right, an act concerning courses, classes, events, and activities within programs of instruction at public schools to prohibit the offering of certain types of courses, classes, events, and activities that isolate students based on race, gender, political affiliation, social class, or other distinctions within programs or instruction, to adjust funding for public schools that offer certain types of courses, classes, events, and activities that isolate students based on race, gender, political affiliation, social class, or other distinctions within programs of instruction and for other purposes. Okay, so that's the long title, right? And then they condense it down in what would be called the subtitle. So that's on the first page. And it says this, essentially it's taking the act and it's boiling it down to the essence. Okay. And it says to prohibit offering courses, events, and activities that isolate students based on characteristics within programs of instruction, and to adjust funding for schools that offer these prohibited courses, events, and activities. So it's important to deal with context, right? Context. So last year, President Donald Trump, he sought to prohibit the teaching of what would be called critical race theory and the 1619 Project, and any of those associated diversity, inclusion, equity type things within federal programs and jobs. Now, as president of the United States, and as he was, the chief executive, he had the right to do that. Now, I know a lot of people didn't like that, but nonetheless, as the chief executive, he had the right to do that. And so that was proposed. People, obviously, because it was Donald Trump and everything that's been filtering around him of whether or not he's a racist, and his presidency was giving aid and comfort to white supremacy, so on and so forth, right? He proposed this. Now, I believe it was Senator Tom Cotton, another gift from Arkansas, okay? he proposed something similar. Okay. I don't know where that went, but needless to say, our legislature here in Arkansas, okay, they put forward a bill. While it doesn't specifically address that in 1218, that's what they're addressing. Like, let's be for real. And in fact, it gets a little bit more specific as we go down in the bill, okay, about what they are talking about. So we'll get there. And so, how I want to proceed is this way, all right? Because surprise, surprise, right? When this came out, you had, some legislators in Arkansas who were making these claims about the Republicans who put forward this bill, right? And the typical ad hominem attacks or implied attacks were being offered, namely, trying to end all Black programs. This is the end of Black History Month. This is ending all the contributions and news and history about Black men and women as it related to Arkansas. But the question becomes, once again, is that what the bill proposed? Again, I got what the media said, right? And how people reacted, right? But what did the bill actually say? And then my other big question is, why was this bill proposed in the first place? And then another question I have to ask myself is, do we know what the 1619 Project is? Do we know what critical race theory is? Do we know these things, or are we just saying, hey, I don't like it because said party proposed this or said party supports this? Does either side actually know what all of this is about? What's the history of this, so that we can make a better and informed decision? Hey, this is Philip Fletcher with the Humanity Matters broadcast and podcast. It's the weekly Sunday show. If you got a comment, give me a comment. I would love to take it. You can email me. As always, you can go and give an email to the Humanity Matters podcast at gmail.com. This is going to be a little longer show than usual. Typically, I go from 7 to about 8. I decided to start at 6 only because I got a lot of information to get through. So got a lot of great information, right? So that you can just simply make up your own mind, right? If you're for this bill, I want you to be for this bill, but be informed as why you're for this bill, right? And if you are against this bill, but you are for all of the, critical race theory, 1619 Project, and associated literature, I want you to be informed, right? It's too easy to say from one side, oh, we need to put this bill out because it could be the undoing of America, right? And it's too easy to say, well, they don't support this stuff. Well, that means they're just racist and white supremacists. No, we have to do our homework, okay? And I'll be honest with you, it's a lot. It is a lot that really goes back a long way, all right? And it is important that we discuss these things as citizens, right? As men and women who live here in America. So where do we start, right? So Derek Bell was a Black American, all right, a Black American who was teaching at Harvard, all right, and his emphasis was law, all right, and in 1980, in the Harvard Law Review, Derek Bell Jr., all right, volume 93, number 3, January 1980, he published basically kind of like a reflection, not only just on the civil rights, but more specifically Brown v. Board of Education. Now, unless you just just fell on the earth. Brown v. Board versus Education was that landmark case that essentially began the desegregation of schools, right? If you live in Arkansas and you're familiar with Little Rock Central and what happened there, that was an outcome of the Brown v. Board of Education decision. All right, so Derek Bell, he reflects on Brown v. Board of Education. And in the title of his article, it is called Brown v. Board of Education and the Interest Convergence Dilemma. All right, the Interest Convergence Dilemma. I love how, and it's very heady, okay? It's written from a legal perspective, right? And so as you read through it, all right, now you can find this on JSTOR, okay? You can get I got institutional access and all that kind of stuff. But you can go through and you can download so many articles. You just log in with your Google or Facebook account. And you get so many articles that you can read, all right, unless you want to pay for it. But you can access that there. So the things I'm talking about, you can go out and get them, all right, and read them for yourself. So Derek Bell, he essentially looks at this, is that the decisions made in regards to Brown v. Board of Education, okay, were made to assuage white people who would not otherwise choose to do so on their own. All right. He puts out that one of the reasons that this was made, this Brown v. Board of Education decision was made, was to fight the communist threat. Okay. Secondly, equality and freedom at home, not just abroad, in response to World War II. So obviously you had Black Americans who were going overseas, fighting the Nazis, fighting against Japan. Okay. And they were coming back home, right? We're fighting for freedom abroad. What's going on at home, right? So Brown v. Board of Education, that decision was made. This is Derek Bell's assertion, right? And then economic development in the South as well. But he argues that the reason that this was made was not necessarily for the sake of Black people, right? But the reason it was made was in the interest of white people. And so the term was coined interest convergence, which would be beneficial rather than to diverge, according to Brown. And so you have these men and women, okay, who they thought were benefiting from the desegregation of schools. Now, there's a lot of ink that has been written on whether that school board desegregation decision regarding Brown has been helpful in the long run. You know, you can have those debates. Obviously, with desegregation, right, you had schools closing. And so you had Black kids going to white schools, right? But you had Black teachers losing their jobs in some cases, right? So was it a benefit? I don't know, right? We can look at education today. Is it a benefit? I mean, that's a discussion that we should have. Nonetheless, Derek Bell, who is considered the father of critical race theory, this is one of the seminal articles that were put out, but mainly so about this term interest convergence. Now, why is that important? All right, so critical race theory comes out of what would be called critical theory, which comes out of Germany, Frankfurt School, so on and so forth, right? Now, it's interesting about Germany. They put out a lot, okay? Like a lot. That's where you get Hegel, right? You get this thing called the dialectic. From there, you get Marx. Marx takes Hegel, turns it on his head, and you get what is produced, the Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital. So Marx produces what is called dialectic materialism, right? And what it's looking at is this conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Just be patient with me. I'm going somewhere with this, okay? Now, so it's looking at it from a historical perspective, right? And one of the things about this is that there's like no universal principle. All right. But essentially, as you look through history, and history is progressing somewhere, and involves kind of this conflict between groups. And so Marx starts with the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Now, further on, some like what would be called neo-Marxists, like kind of flip it back again. So with Marx, he focuses on class and economics. With neo-Marxists, they focus more on culture, education, things like that. And so out of that comes a writer who in 1965, all right, he writes what is called, let me get there, Repressive Tolerance, all right? Repressive Tolerance is written by Herbert Marcus, 1965. And with Marcus, he wants to really look at this idea of tolerance. And it is quite a read, all right? So if you look up Repressive Tolerance, all right, you can see some of these elements that I think is very important. Let me get to my notes real quick, because I got a lot of notes here. All right, so with Marcus, all right, he argues this, that in order for true tolerance to exist, intolerance toward prevailing policies, attitudes, opinions, and the extension of the tolerance to policies, attitudes, opinions which are outlawed are suppressed. All right, so depending on where you fall within the dialectic. So Marcus is using this dialectic. You got the status quo and you got everybody else, okay? And so for him, those with power use intolerance to stifle liberation, and those who are pursuing liberation need to practice tolerance to usher in new policies, attitudes, and opinions to relieve the powerful. Now that's close quote, page 1. All right. And so he's using a historical approach, he being Herbert Marcus, all right, similar to Marx and others. So what is tolerated today will become the norm, but in some future, it will be viewed as tools to suppress. So if we're looking at it today, Herbert Marcus would be saying this: hey, the reason we're going to use intolerance, aka the 1619 bill. This is how Herbert Marcus would interpret it, right? The 1619 bill is being used by the status quo, right? HB1218 is being used by the status quo, those who got the political power, right? To silence, all right, those who want to put forward the 1619 Project Critical Race Theory, right? All right, so those individuals then, all right, would then be proposing, hey, we need tolerance, okay? We need tolerance so that we can talk about these specific things, all right? So there's some supporting ideas here from Marcus. The use of tolerance by the status quo is a means to stifle the, quote, the chances of creating an existence without fear and misery, close quote, all right? So there comes a point, now he talks about art, which is confusing here. So he talks about art, for instance, all right? And he says, what is created art, for example, is subject to history. History defines the status of the art. What was once art becomes pseudo art, all right? So what was acceptable at one time, all right, has now become unacceptable, all right? And so there's always this thing that is happening in history, all right? And as you go on, one of the things, and we're going to put up some tenets of critical race theory in a moment, is that today CRT is acting as the tolerance pill, okay? And what do I mean by that? So Marcus talks about how there are people, all right, who are being held down by the status quo, all right? And they're described as the manipulated, the indoctrinated individuals who parrot as their own the opinion of their masters, for whom heteronomy has become autonomy, close quote. All right. So from one position, CRT is saying, hey, you got all these people running around talking about 1776. That's the true founding of the nation. Actually, we're about the red pill, y'all. It really needs to be framed in 1619, right? Everything that you know about America needs to be reframed, okay? But eventually what happens is, if you follow the line of thought with CRT and with Marcus and others, all right, if CRT became the norm, it would then become the status quo. Then the question becomes, how will they be practicing intolerance so that their ideas can continue to spread? All right. So you've got Marcus. So I want to show y'all something here. Here's a family tree. Okay. A family tree regarding CRT, okay, regarding 1619 and other associated products. So you got Herbert Marcus, neo-Marxist, all right, Angela Davis, all right. Herbert Marcus was Angela Davis's PhD advisor, okay, great influence. Then you have Derek Bell, whom we've read about. Then he would be considered the father of critical race theory. The mother would be considered Kimberly Crenshaw. And Kimberly Crenshaw is the individual who developed what will be called intersectionality. All right. So she took it another step further. And so then you've got the products, the literature that's been put out that's gotten a whole lot more familiar. Now, you may know it as anti-racist thought. It's become real popular, especially in light of what happened last year with the protests and the riots and the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others. So all of this is being developed, is happening within a context, okay? So you've got those like Nicole Hannah-Jones. She was the lead with the 1619 Project from the New York Times. You got Ibram Kendi, who has published Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist. You got Robin DiAngelo with White Fragility, and you got others, okay? So kind of like a family tree. But when you read a lot of their literature, they talk about similar things, okay? Similar things. Now, the tenets of critical race theory are the following, all right? So we've got counter storytelling, the permanence of racism, whiteness as property, interest convergence, we've talked about that, critique of liberalism. So let's go down these real quick. All right. So counter storytelling. So counter storytelling is this, is that the status quo, those that are in power, they are communicating history from a certain vantage point. And that communication of history has particular values, biases, so on and so forth. Right. Okay. Counter storytelling, or providing an alternative narrative of a lived experience, right, is an example of the 1619 Project specifically, but more so, it's kind of like, you're standing out on the street corner, right? It's four of you standing on a corner, right? Those four people, all of them see an accident, right? And so the investigators come and they're like, hey, Philip, what happened? So I'm standing on the corner, I'm looking north, right? And I say, hey, this is what I saw. For whatever reason, the investigator doesn't get the information of the other three. He just takes mine, right? So I will be considered the status quo, right? And then what happens is somebody who's looking south, so looking the other direction, okay, they come and find the investigator and like, hey, this is what I saw about that accident. And the investigator's like, okay, I know there was an accident that happened. Well, I got more information to give you, right? And so you've got these different perspectives that are coming along to tell the story about one specific event, okay? Now, what is true is that even though my story was taken and what I saw is what I saw. So it's taken into consideration. It can't be thrown out because the person looking from the south comes and adds information, and the person looking east and the person looking west, right, offers information as well. All of that information is taken into consideration concerning that objective event that happened, right? So what am I talking about? So in counter storytelling, right, it's fine that other persons want to come along, or other groups want to come along and say, hey, this is what happened in regards to this particular event. What cannot happen is the erasure of the perspective of the other person that gave that story, a story about that particular event. Critical race theory in counter storytelling seeks to not just tell the counter story, but push the whole other story aside as if it did not exist. All right, next, the permanence of racism. All right, the permanence of racism. Now, what is being proposed in critical race theory is this, is that for racism, it will be permanent within this nation, within its systems and institutions. Why? Because it was developed by white men these white men, this white culture is racist. And so because of that, it's within the systems, right? It's within the institutions. So as long as these systems, institutions continue to exist and operate, racism is always going to be happening, right? So that's how also pay attention. We get in the shift from racism as it was understood within individuals, and now it is moved to systems and institutions. The next one is this: whiteness as property. Now, this was curious to me because Black people were looked at as property, right? Many Black people were bartered and sold as slaves, okay? But when they talk about here whiteness as property, what is being talked about is this, is that when you look at the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, Declaration of Independence, Constitution of the United States, talking about men have inalienable rights, right? We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Critical race theory is arguing that, well, the securing of that life, liberty, and happiness can only be secured if you have this property asset, namely white skin. That because you have white skin, all right, you are free in terms of, those Bill of Rights, the first 10, all right, but in total, in summary, to achieve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And so whiteness is property. And this property can't be sold, it can't be bought, anything like that. You're just carrying it with you. And so that is one of the explanations for the disparate outcomes that are existing in our country. This is what they would propose. All right. Next, we talked about interest convergence, that decisions are being made really honestly in the benefit of white people, not really in the benefit of non-white persons. And then finally, a critique of liberalism. Now, when they're talking about liberalism, they're not talking about liberals as we would understand them today, like a progressive or someone who votes Democrat. All right. When they're talking about liberalism, they're talking about the old school definition, classic liberal. That is what gave us this idea of the freedom of speech. This is what gave us the idea that all men are created equal. This is the idea that helped shape and inform what we would find in the Declaration of Independence, as well as the Constitution of the United States. And as critical race theory would argue, is that this liberalism and its association with capitalism has actually contributed to a lot of the problems that we're seeing that is happening with Black men and women in America. Hey, this is Dr. Philip Fletcher with the Humanity Matters broadcast and podcast. We are discussing HB 1218. And right now, I'm simply setting a context about critical race theory, the 1619 Project. And then we're going to swing back around to HB1218. Now, it's important that as you are looking up a particular topic that you try to get all sides, right? Right. So I sat and, had to review some things early on from my undergrad about critical race theory, had to review some of these articles. Okay. Give everybody their fair shake. So I went and listened to videos by Derek Bell, went and listened to lectures given by Kimberly Crenshaw, so that everybody could get a fair reading. I honestly read the essay again by Nicole Hannah-Jones, her opening seminal essay regarding the 1619 Project. It is that important so you can get a fair understanding of what is going on in our country and why these bills are being proposed, so on and so forth. It may be important to you. It may not be important to you, but I'll tell you this. It's here already. Okay? It's here already. It is here already. All right. So I looked up a important presentation by Kimberly Crenshaw, and is from Mapping the Margins. And so she gives a essay, and it's dealing with intersectionality. Intersectionality, another important part of critical race theory, and mapping from the margins. It is, the subtitle is Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color. All right. And in here, she has things that I agree with and things that I'm like, you're going too far a little bit. Right. All right. So she posits the importance of identity politics, quote, has been a source of strength, community, and intellectual development, close quote. All right. She sees social power is active in exclusion. All right. The object of exclusion includes people of color, gays, lesbians, and others. She observes the lack of willingness in identity politics to bring together multiple identities to address politically. She desires to offer a corrective for feminism and anti-racism, what is now commonly known as intersectionality. So she was saying, like, hey, feminists, y'all talking about what happens specifically with white women, but what happens when you look at Black women and gender, right? Or Black women, right? So race and gender intersect, right? Or how about when we look at immigrants who are women, right? And who are not here legally, right? That's a different intersectionality than a woman who has experienced domestic abuse, so on and so forth. So this is what she is positing in terms of what is called intersectionality. Okay, so she argues violence, and this is the context when she's addressing violence against women. She argues violence which occurs in the lives of white women is qualitatively different than non-white women. I would have to talk to, that's a tough one. That's a tough statement. So she looks at structures. Okay, again, looking at structures, right? This is like an important thing, structures. For critical race theory, structures, all right? Social domination, class oppression, and other considerations converge, creating a structure. I quote, their experiences reveal how diverse structures intersect, since even the class dimension is not independent from race and gender, close quote. All right. She appeals to subordination as the explanation of women not being able to access particular services. And again, when she's speaking of women, she's typically talking of non-white women. All right. She critiques anti-racist approaches, which put the problem of domestic violence as a racism issue while ignoring the gender domination. All right. Yet offers this throwaway line, which could be interpreted as letting a man off the hook. And this is what she says. And I cringed at this. And she said this, of course, it is probably true that racism contributes to the cycle of violence, given the stress that men of color experience in a dominant society, close quote. So it's like she's shifting responsibility off of men of color regarding the domestic abuse that they perpetrate on their wife, their partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whomever. Crenshaw has a disdain for any attempt to end categories, as she interprets this act as quote unquote vulgarized social construction. Crenshaw argues that a postmodernist project can assist in understanding meaning between the powerful and the subordinate. Again, she's maintaining the dialectic. Okay. So by using categories, she argues, postmodernism has to engage with these categories. All right. The meaning and values associated with those categories, right? But each one of those categories have different meanings and values, right? And my question is, what happens when they collide with one another? All right, Crenshaw further argues marginalized people need to locate in categories as a form of resistance and political power. To do otherwise is to vacate and destroy it. All right. So again, groups, categories. Here it is again. We have the proletariat, bourgeoisie. We got the us versus them. We've got the white versus black. It's a continual thing of putting forward these dialectics in order to achieve what they would consider to be liberation. Liberation. So critical race theory as well does not like colorblind thought. All right. So trying to get some for and against both sides critical race theory, right? So that you can make up your own mind, right? The thing I just referenced was Kimberly Crenshaw mapping the margins. All right. You can get it and read it for yourself. Okay. Ultimately, I want to ask the question, how does all of this inform HB 1218? Okay. HB 1218. Again, if you have a question, get it in the comments section. If you want to send me an email, just get it to me. You can always email me at humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. So let's get back to it. I hope everybody is learning something. If not, it's okay. So Coleman Hughes gives a presentation at Harvard. Now, this is interesting because Harvard, Derek Bell kind of produced this critical race theory, right? Marcus, Brandeis, right? You got Angela Davis out west. You got Kimberly Crenshaw coming out from the west, right? And so Coleman Hughes gives a lecture and critiques critical race theory and color blindness. Now, I posted this video on my Facebook page, all right, for you to access. All right. And he argues that critical race theory is, he identifies two principles in critical race theory. Okay. All right. Neutrality and power. Neutrality and power. In regards to neutrality, there are no neutral value structures. And CRT asserts white values in America are clothed in neutrality. Okay. In regards to power, well, so that kind of echoes, all right, what Derek Bell was proposing in regards to his interest convergence. Okay. They're making these decisions for their own interest, white persons, not for the interest of all people. That's what critical theory is, race theory is suggesting. All right. In regards to power, okay, critical race theory asserts for racism to exist, it has to include power plus prejudice, right? So power plus prejudice equals racism. So that's why when people say, Black people, Mexicans, Asians, they can't be racist. And the reason they can't be racist is because they don't have power, right? They can be prejudiced, but they can't be racist. Only white people can be racist because they have prejudice plus power. That's the CRT formulation, okay? CRT also has moved from the individual culprit being racist toward the modern conceptualization of racism being systemic or structural racism or institutional racism. So kind of get an understanding where all these terms are coming from, whether you're seeing on your social media, whether you're seeing it talked about in news articles, you may be hearing it in school, so on and so forth. That's where it's coming from. And so he argues CRT is a paradox. If there's no neutrality because of bias, all right, leading to no universal principles, then CRT itself falls into the same problem. CRT lacks neutrality because of the bias of race, right? So Coleman addresses critical race theory's rejection of color blindness, all right, which is also within that fifth tenet of their critique of liberalism. Okay, so Coleman argues color blindness does not communicate I, as a person, do not see the phenotypic characteristic of race, skin color, right? All right. Coleman argues it is and I quote, it is an ethical principle in which we should treat people without regard to race. So it is not when someone says that they're colorblind, right? And let me inform you, if you're using this term color blindness, right? Your color blindness is, you're not saying you don't see my skin color. I want you to see all of me, right? I want you to see all of me. That's fine, all right? What it means is, and what we should mean in terms of color blindness, all right, is that it functions as an ethical principle to confront racism expressed in individual experiences and what would be exercised from a policy standpoint. So back in the day, all right, here was structural systemic racism, right? The federal government, state governments, local governments having within their laws and their policies race-based type legislation, all right? And that was coming from the government was doing those things, okay? The government was doing those things. In fact, there's evidence that many businesses didn't like the legislation coming down that was saying, you know, whites can only eat here, blacks can only eat here. All right. Blacks can only get on these buses, whites can only get on these buses. Right. There's a lot of government involvement in terms of racism. So if today was like 1968 and earlier, I would agree with the structural racism argument, right? Because I could go to a law and see it. I could go to a school handbook and see it, all right? I believe that we progressed a lot. And so for me, I'm kind of showing my hand here. That's why I have a hard time with the idea of systemic and structural racism, all right? Now, I know people are going to probably make arguments not as visible anymore, but okay, well, you have to point to something, okay? We have to point to something because simply looking at outcomes alone and saying, well, the disparate outcome is due to racism, you can't make that argument because there's other variables that have to be considered. But in this main case, according to Coleman, color blindness coming out of liberalism, right? Color blindness, that's what we heard preached by Martin Luther King consistently, all right? King's message would not be accepted today by critical race theorists. It wouldn't. They reject that idea. And you can find it actually in Kendi's work where he asserts to address the discrimination of the past, we have to do more discrimination based on race and set up these councils to do such things. Like, okay. All right. So Mr. Coleman, he offers that. Some other helpful people that you can look at. James Lindsay offers a critique about critical race theory as well. All right. And for him, he sees, and he talks about Marcus and others as well, that postmodernism is at work in this thing, is that knowledge is power and political, true and authentic, and who gets to determine it. All right. Knowledge is power and knowledge is political. All right. And so who gets to determine it? Is it just the one person at the corner who saw the accident, or do all four people who saw the accident get to determine it? All right. That's something that we need to consider. Now, moving on to the familiar products of critical race theory. Now, there's a lot of popular products that's come out. All right. So it's moved from the legal realm, started by Derek Bell. All right. And then with the help of Kimberly Crenshaw, so the father and mother of critical race theory, right? It's moved into other cultural institutions. All right. So it's here. It's here, right? It's being taught in schools. I'm sure it's been taught in colleges. Okay. It's been taught in some public schools around the country. All right. You can see it in entertainment. I mean, the majority of us have been at home, a whole lot of Netflixing and things like that. I was watching Law and Order, one of my favorite shows, started by my son. And they have episodes recently that are just simply talking about everything that America has been through since 2020. And the critical race theory idea is laden throughout the episodes. Familiar products include Black Lives Matter, gender studies, other ethnic groups, right? LGBTQ plus A. If I'm missing one, please charge it to my head, not my heart. Okay. Popular text. I've mentioned them before. Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. All right. Next. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. All right. And then the 1619 Project. Okay. So White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. You know, she offers kind of like a counter narrative driven 1619 Project, counter narrative driven as well. Okay. 1619 Project. So where the rubber meets the road. So in August 2019, the New York Times published this series of essays and artwork. And quote, it aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. Close quote. All right. So Nicole Hannah-Jones, she writes this essay called The Idea of America. It's one of the seminal essays of the 1619 Project. She opens up with a story about her parents, and she's curious about her dad's patriotism to America. All right. And so she goes through and she lays out well-known facts about slavery, the contributions of African descendants of slavery, kind of walks it through modern day, right? Many things you're familiar with. And then she goes back and she critiques Thomas Jefferson. She critiques George Washington and some of the other founding fathers. And she goes on to say, and I quote, she asserts this: the United States is a nation founded on both an ideal and a lie, close quote. And what she's referencing is, again, all men are created equal, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And she says, that's a great idea, but it was all a lie, right? Because since 1619, this nation has had slaves. All right. In a tweet, all right, she wrote this. I quote, and this is from her Twitter. All right. I argue that 1619 is our true founding. Also, look at the banner pick in my profile. In her banner pick on her profile, she has July 4th, 1776 crossed out, and then she puts underneath it 1619. Okay. So she's asserting that our true founding, right, is 1619. So if I'm the guy looking north and seeing the accident, right, she's the person looking south and she's saying, no, my perspective is the true one, not what the guy across the street said. All right. That's a pretty tough claim. Now, the 1619 Project has faced a lot of criticism for its historical inaccuracies and the way it is being framed. It's being critiqued because of not only inaccuracies, but also the reductionistic approach that is taken in the project, and then omissions, all right, that a lot of contributions were left out. So the project is actually committing the same error that they are charging others of making, those who would argue for the founding being July 1776. All right, so she lays out well-known facts about slavery and contributions of ADOS, that's African descendants of slavery. Got it. Awesome. Agree. All right. I disagree with her assertion that America was founded on a lie. Okay. Next, it lacks casting slavery in a global context. It lacks telling the story of how people in Angola, she mentions Angola, all right, how people in Angola became slaves to be sold to Europeans who would then trade slaves to America. Like, so here's the thing. So whether 1619, the 17th century, or 1776 to 18th century, one of the things that frustrates me, especially about the discussion of slavery, right, is it's almost made to seem as if slavery began and ended in America. Like there was no slavery existing in any other parts of the world, right? But yet, like I go read my Bible, like in the Old Testament, slaves. I mean, the whole story of Exodus is about slavery, and that was Egyptians enslaving Hebrews. All right, you got slavery mentioned when Moses receives the law. You got slavery mentioned when the Israelites are taken into captivity by northern Samaria, the Syrians, excuse me, but then also when Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes them, right? Like slavery is like as old as mankind itself. And so this continual casting of slavery as if it was a institution, an economic situation that was solely existing in the United States and it didn't exist anywhere else, I think is very unfortunate. And the other thing is this, and this is one of the things I had to wrestle with in my undergrad degree, was the understanding that Africans were dealing with slavery already, right? A form of slavery, depending on where you were. But then when they had their introduction with Europeans, they continued the slave trade. They did. Like, I don't know why we don't talk about that. And then even after the ending of slavery in America, how Muslims were continuing trading slaves. Like it's, yes. So I wish that when we talk about this, slavery will be considered in a global context. And the second thing is this, is especially when you're reading back in history, we can have the tendency to take what we now understand as morally right and true and ethically appropriate and read it back into a historical situation, right? Not understanding the context in which those individuals were existing. Now, I'm not justifying slavery at any point in history, all right? But we have to understand the context in which slavery develops, the types of slavery that developed, and all who were involved in that situation to provide an accurate telling of the accident that happened, right? I keep using this word accident, okay? All right. So as an interesting critique towards the end of Nicole Hannah-Jones' essay, all right, she kind of throws shade at Asian Americans who are suing schools such as Harvard. Now, there's this whole affirmative action thing going on at Harvard right now where Asian Americans are suing because they're meeting the academic standards, all right? But there's so many of them that are achieving it. Now Harvard is making different decisions to exclude them. And so Miss Jones goes on to question why would one marginalized group, okay, why would they seek to undo a program, affirmative action, which was implemented for the benefit of another marginalized group? So here, this demonstrates one of the critical flaws of CRT, kind of echoing what Coleman was talking about, this lack of universal principles, right? And that there's a bias in it, okay? And what was also espoused by Marcus. Please go read that Marcus. It's long, but woo, repressive tolerance. All right, that's what it's called. One group rises up and confronts the status quo of the existing group. All right. So Asian Americans contesting the system designed to benefit another group, namely Black Americans. Should not the Asian American story prevail? So here's my question. If I am correctly applying CRT, all right, should not the Asian American story prevail to demonstrate the consistency of what this project claims, and many like it? Mainly this. Excuse me. The status quo, all right, the status quo will not tolerate the pursuit of liberation that is being pursued by these Asian Americans in relationship to access to Harvard University. All right. They're making their claim. They're meeting all the academic standards, so on and so forth. Right. But the status quo is saying no. So CRT is asserting that the Asian American has to continue to press his or her claim to upset that status quo. But in this case, the status quo is benefiting another marginalized group of people. So who prevails? Here's a confusion in CRT. All right. Hey, this is Dr. Philip Fletcher with the Humanity Matters broadcast and podcast. I am talking about CRT 1619 and HB 1218. We're about to transition to HB 1218. All right. And look at this bill before I shut down for the day. I've been going at it for an hour. I hope that you have benefited from this in some form or fashion. I'm kind of blowing through some things, but again, I want to put up to you some things that we've been covering. All right. So CRT's family tree. All right. Herbert Marcus, he was educated at the Frankfurt School or the Frankfurt Institute, heavy in Marxism, neo-Marxism, right? He was the doctoral advisor for Angela Davis. If you're not familiar with Angela Davis, look her up. All right. Derek Bell, considered the father of CRT. He produced a very influential article regarding Brown v. Board versus education and interest convergence. Okay. And then Kimberly Crenshaw, considered the mother of CRT, helped develop something called intersectionality, kind of taking it a step further. And then some products, all right, what people have produced, all right, writing, literature that is really influencing much of our culture today. All right. So think about it. Politics, sports, entertainment, all sit downstream of culture. They do. All right. Nicole Hannah-Jones, 1619 Project. Ibram Kendi, Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. And there are others. All right. The Tenets of Critical Race Theory. Counter Storytelling. The Permanence of Racism. Whiteness as Property. Interest Convergence. Critique of Liberalism. All right. So it's kind of a snapshot of that. We've been going through some of the foundational documents, source material, primary source material. Been looking at some of the critiques that people have offered in regards to critical race theory, but then also the 1619 Project. The critiques are out there. I encourage you to look at those who are supporting the 1619 Project, but also those who are critiquing it. Now, HB 1218. Again, HB 1218, just as a review, let me bring this bill back up. If you follow me for any type of time, I like going through these bills. So House Bill 1218 was filed by Representative Lowry, and he had these sponsors: Bentley, Ladyman, Lundstrom, Richmond, and Rye. Context, this is the Arkansas legislature. All right. So this is our state house. All right. So those state reps put forward this bill. And then it was also sponsored by the state senators, Stubblefield, Johnson, Garner, and Raypert. Transparency, Raypert, he is my state senator for where I live here in Conway, Arkansas. There is a long form of the bill. All right, the title, I'm going to read you the subtitle: to prohibit offering courses, events, and activities that isolate students based on characteristics within programs of instruction, and to adjust funding for schools that offer these prohibited courses, events, and activities. So what does Marcus, Bell, Davis, Kimberly Crenshaw, all of them, what does all of that have to do, if anything, with this bill? I believe these elected officials are responding to, they're being reactionary, all right, to the thought that is continually growing. How do I say this in just very subtle language? That white people are bad and America is just fundamentally racist and bad and is just laden with white supremacy. All right. Another proponent of CRT, and this thought just got me thinking. Let me bring him up. Dr. Keith Brooks, he gave a 2016 ed talk, all right, in regards to critical race theory. And one of the things he said is this, is that Brooks defines white supremacy as a mindset within white persons. So it's not in me, not in Asians, it's only in white persons. So little old Billy, all right, who's 4 years old, 6 years old, on up to big old Jim Bob, who's standing out in the street corner, you know, with his camouflage on and his semi-automatic rifle, right, to good old Jane, who is, you know, just good liberal white woman, right? All of y'all, every last one of you, right, have a mindset of white supremacy. And with this mindset, and I'll continue to quote by Brooks, white persons who walk around, subscribe to it, and don't know it, close quote. Like, you're just actively or inactively a person who enacts white supremacy or maintains it. All right, so 1619, excuse me, HB1218 is responding to this. And the literature, right, those people that I just listed, right, and others like that, the curriculums that are going out, and this zeitgeist that is going on proposing this type of thing, right? So again, what we've got going on is this dialectic, right? Those in power are white people. Either you're doing things to maintain it, or you're not doing anything, and by you not doing anything, you're maintaining it anyway. And then there's everybody else, all right? Everybody else. So I believe this is what they are responding to. Now, I want to break down this bill, okay? Then from there, I want to give some encouragements to those who are for this and against this, all right? Because I want to speak to everybody, all right? And then I have something for y'all politicians specifically, but I may be holding on to that one for a future time. All right, so this bill, all right? This bill. So the bill is 4 pages, okay? Short bill. Congress should learn something. 4 pages. All right, so lines 9 through 20, okay, deals with the title and the subtitle of the bill. All right, now, who is the object of this bill? So, important to me, any bill, I go look at 2 things: the United States Constitution and the state constitution. All right, so Number 10 in the Constitution, anything that is not laid out for the federal government to do, I'm summarizing here, is reserved to the states. All right. So the states are handling their education. All right. So they got a state board of education, and then we got school boards, right? Wherever here in the state of Arkansas. And I'm sure wherever you live, it's a similar thing. So there's not supposed to be no federal Department of Education because it's not mentioned in the Constitution. Well, anyways, that's not our discussion today. But it's reserved to the states. That's the 10th Amendment. Okay. So in the Arkansas Constitution, it would be Title VI. Okay. So you can go online, look at the Code of Arkansas, a public access main page. Okay. If you go to Title VI, so there's titles here. So there's general provisions, agriculture, alcoholic beverages, business commercial law, criminal offenses. Then there's Title VI, education. Now, what this bill is addressing would be Title VI-16-152. All right. So the last one here is 6-16-151, dealing with activities, payments prohibited. So this would add an addition to Title VI. Okay. Now, Section 1 of HB1218 says this. Now, I understand. I talked to a state senator that this bill is being redrafted. So I'm just giving my critiques of the bill as it is. When a revised one comes out, then I will update my critiques. But as it is, as it's been published, this is what it is. All right. So Arkansas Code Title VI, Chapter 16, Subchapter 1 is amended to add an additional section to read as follows. So then 6-16-152, programs of instruction prohibitions. All right. Who does this cover? You go to the second page, lines 1 through 4. This addresses public schools, or as I like to say, government schools. All right. A public school district, an open enrollment public charter school, and a state-supported 2-year or 4-year institution of higher education. So in my vantage point here in Conway, Arkansas, that includes the Conway Public School District. We don't have any charter schools here. And UCA. Okay. So what is it seeking to do? All right. So here's the prohibition. So after the definition of what a public school is, okay, it then says this, and I quote, a public school shall not allow a course, class, event, or activity within its program of instruction that, now 2 of them, promotes the overthrow of the United States government. I can agree with that, and we should all agree with that, right? Okay. 2, promotes division between, resentment of, or social justice for a race, gender, political affiliation, social class, or particular class of people. Okay, so this is what I think. They should strike out the term of social justice and keep promotes division between race, gender, political affiliation, social class, particular class of people. I mean, hopefully there's not a school out there that wants to promote division, right? So then lines 11 through 15, all right, I can't agree with those. Race, gender, political affiliation. Now, number 3. So we got promotes the overthrow, promotes division. Here's the third prohibition. Advocates the isolation of a group of students based on a particular characteristic instead of the treatment of students as individuals, which may include, without limitation, isolating a group of students based on the following: ethnicity, race, religion, gender, and social class. Now, so this is confusing. This part's confusing to me. And this is why, right? Because if you go back and look at Title VI, okay, and you look at Title VI-16-121, African American history teaching materials. So they've isolated, if you will, teaching materials, course instruction, right, for a particular ethnicity. So either they're repealing that in this, or they need to rewrite. I don't understand what it is they're trying to say here. So this is where I could see where people could walk away, and I've seen people's social media and Facebook posts, and where they're trying to get rid of Black history and so on and so forth. All right. I think they need to clarify that one. The other thing is this. So lines 11 through 15 say race, gender, political affiliation, social class, or particular class of people. But then lines 20 through 24 say ethnicity, race, religion, gender, and social class. Why the differences? Political affiliation is missing in the second one. Ethnicity is missing in the first one. You know, I'm just trying to figure out where they're trying to go with this bill. Number 4, violates state or federal civil rights laws. Okay. All right. Negatively targets nationalities or countries. Now, so I don't know what that means. What is that? Negatively targets specific nationalities or countries. What does that mean? Because, you know, countries throughout their histories have done good stuff and bad stuff. United States has done good stuff and bad stuff, right? So we can't talk about those things. What does that actually mean? Okay. Now, here comes the stick. There's no carrot in this, right? So in lines 27 through the end, there's a penalty. Well, all the way up to page 3, line 30. Okay. So the end of page 2, all the way to page 3, line 30, this is where the stick is, right? So if a school district, if a public school district, open enrollment charter school, or 2 or 4 year college or university is teaching this, they're proposing a 10% penalty of their monthly distribution, okay, until they rectify that. And they have 60 days to rectify that. All right. Now, if it's the 2 or 4 year university, then the attorney general gets involved. All right. If it's the public schools or charter schools, then the state board and the district is involved. Okay. All right. 10%, whatever that is. I mean, obviously that differs, but 10%. All right. So at the end of 3, it moves from what is prohibited, right? So it mentioned what is prohibited, the penalty if you teach those things, or that curriculum is being used, or there are events or things like that. Then it moves to the things that are not prohibited. All right. All right. So now I'm asking myself, is the bill working to clarify the prohibitions, right? So page 3, line 30, all right? The section does not prohibit a course, class, event, or activity for Native American students that is required to be offered in order for a public school, open enrollment, public charter school to comply with federal law. So there's a federal law that exists right now where there's some type of course, class, or event or activity for the benefit of Native Americans. So I don't understand. All right. 2, the grouping of students according to academic performance, including proficiency in English language, that may result in disparate impact on students of a particular ethnicity. Now, I think what they're referencing here is like a gifted program, a GATE type program, and then ESL classes. Okay. What else is not prohibited? All right. A course, class, event, or activity that includes the accurate history of an ethnic group is open to all students unless the course, class, event, or activity violates subsection B of the section. All right. Includes the discussion of controversial aspects of history, or includes instruction on the Holocaust, an instance of genocide, historical oppression of a particular group of people based on ethnicity, race, class, or African American history as required. 616-121. So this is not repealing African American history. So African American history is safe, y'all. It's safe. All right. It's safe. Your Black History Month programs are safe under this bill as it is currently constructed. Also, what is safe is teaching on the Holocaust and genocide. I'm assuming they're referring to what happened with Native Americans, okay? Or historical oppression of a particular group of people. All right. So I'm like, okay. But then I asked myself, going back up to page 4, line 2, includes the accurate history of an ethnic group. And then my question becomes, who determines the accurate history of an ethnic group and how it is told? This is what we're in right now, right? 1619 is saying it needs to be told this way, right? Critical race theory is arguing that counter stories need to be told. Okay. But whether you support critical race theory or not, my question still becomes, who gets to determine the accurate history of an ethnic group? Who? My second thing is this. So in colleges and universities, right? At least I know there are already established degree programs, gender studies or, a particular ethnicity. So my question becomes, how do they, and these things have been going on for like years. I got my degree back in the 90s, my undergrad. So I'm like, how does this address that? I don't know. It ends with the voluntary participation by a public school student in a public school organization or public school event that is not part of a program of instruction within the public schools. All right. So, hey, your Black sororities and fraternities, y'all safe. Your cool student groups, y'all safe. So what is HB 1218 trying then to achieve? What is it trying to achieve? So in my last 8 minutes, I am about to close out. Oh, we got a comment here. All right, Laura asked, I've read of similar bills being filed in other states. Do you know what group wrote this legislation? It's getting lawmakers to file it in multiple states. No, I do not at all. I don't. I will do some digging and find out, Laura. I appreciate that question. All right. Hope you've been hanging in here. All right. It's been a lot of work trying to offer people some information. And so finally, I want to offer these final thoughts. Hey, Laura, thank you for your question. I appreciate you very much. All right. So for those who are against critical race theory, 1619 project and the like, but you're supporting HB 1218, right? So in terms of critical race theory, 1619 project, all right, this theory is becoming the dominating perspective. Okay. It's not coming, it's here. It's like here. If you're against CRT, 1619, and the like, all right, and you support this bill, I need you to be prepared for the ad hominem attacks that are going to come. The mischaracterizations about you and how you view other people. So if I apply Herbert Marcus, okay, your ideas, your solutions are simply viewed as maintaining the power structure, and the status quo. You're seeking to maintain white supremacy. You're seeking to maintain white privilege in America. You are simply acting fascist. You are a racist, or you are Uncle Tom, a sellout, a race traitor, those type of ad hominem attacks. Just be prepared. Okay. I would encourage you to read up on some of this stuff that I mentioned, right? Just get a familiarization with it. But also acknowledge the weaknesses of your claims. There are multiple perspectives regarding American history. And I think it's important that we talk about those. Now, the question becomes, is the education system the most appropriate place for that to occur? Maybe should it start with our families first, telling our own family stories and our family history, and the place of education should be reserved for reading, writing, and arithmetic? If you belong to what this perspective offers as being the status quo, you are not familiar with other group perspectives, I would encourage you to go and learn from somebody else's perspective. Get their take on what they saw at the intersection. Just borrowing from Crenshaw. For those of you who support CRT, or you don't know what CRT is, but you're like fanboying and fangirling Ibram Kendi and Kimberly Crenshaw and the like, right? You will need to clearly acknowledge the roots of this stuff in Marxist and neo-Marxist thought and its influence over this theory and a lot of the writings that you're reading and what is being proposed today. Yours is the perspective of the lived experience, okay? You offering a perspective of history. This does not justify it as being the only perspective. And so don't suffer from the very error that you're critiquing. So if you're critiquing and saying that 1776 cannot be the only perspective, then you cannot come around and say that the 1619 perspective is the only perspective, or that white supremacy and white privilege is the perspective. Critical race theory does do a service by highlighting the lived experience of others. But remember, there's 330 million lived experiences in America. Your theory is based on a premise of us versus them. Look at the progression. Bourgeois, proletariat, Marx. White, non-white, race. That's where we got neo-Marxists coming from. Male, female, gender. It's this consistent problem. There's always a problem, always a tension, always has to be rectified. Acknowledge the weaknesses in your own claims. What does the evidence show? We know there was a car accident. Yes. We know there is a car accident. And so when we bring in all the perspectives, we should be able to adequately paint a picture of American history. And I'll say this. Just as it is equally dismissive to call people who advocate for CRT or the 1619 as being socialist, communist, unpatriotic. It is equally dismissive. Now I'm talking to those who support CRT and all of its products and reject this bill, HB 1218. It is equally wrong to use ad hominem attacks to silence critique. You are functioning just as Marcus is actually asking people to function. All right. You are functioning as the status quo, as the arbiters of truth. Now, finally, I want to speak to my Christian brothers and sisters. All right. This is my opinion based off of what I've read from and heard from the horses' mouths themselves. Okay. I've read and seen that CRT is now acting very divisively within the church. I see it as having a similar effect as to when the Jesus seminar was making its rounds, questioning the divinity of Jesus, questioning the resurrection, so on and so forth, right? And we see the effects of how that impacted the church, all right? When I say the church, I'm talking Catholic and Protestant, all right? And now with CRT, I've read assertions being made that if churches or denominations or groups are not affirming CRT and these types of things, that they are not taking responsibility and owning their part in the racial problems that are existing today in the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who name the name of Jesus Christ, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, whatever, how you fall on the spectrum in Christianity at large, CRT does not align fundamentally with the tenets of the Christian faith. It doesn't. If we are seeking to assert reconciliation, we are seeking to assert forgiveness, grace, these terms of justice and righteousness, and for men and women to live freely. The tenets of CRT do not fit that bill. There is silencing. There is an intolerance there. There is the categorization of a particular group of people on the basis of their particular phenotypic characteristics, and is seeking to exclude them or to put a label on them that is only unique to them and not to everybody else. So it is my understanding, looking at the foundational documents. I think it's important to look at the foundational documents of anything, right? To honor what those persons were putting out. And I would assert that CRT does not align with the tenets of the Christian faith. Now, in terms of our school system, I think y'all legislators should do this. If a school district wants to teach 1619, right? Or if the Latino community wants to come along and teach their thing, Asian Americans want to come along and teach their thing in public schools, all right, it's an elective. It's not mandatory, right? Make this bill to say that every student and his or her parent is an elective. that way, it's not a requirement to graduate or to achieve whatever the standard or the minimum requirements are to move from one class to the next. It's an elective because the responsibility of teaching such things should begin actually in the homes. But more so than this, if you legislators would actually focus more on increasing access for parents to determine where and what type of schools their kids could go through to and attend, this wouldn't be an issue. So if there is a school that wants to develop itself to be a 1619 school and wants to implement every aspect of CRT, then that private school or that charter school, they can do that. If there is a school that just wants to make it an elective, then there's that. If there's a school that doesn't want it at all, then that's that. At least the parents have the power to choose where they send their children, right? I think it's fundamentally unfair to force any student to take any of these classes. And I think it's fundamentally unfair that Arkansas residents would have to contribute any of their dollars to support an instruction that they don't agree with. So by making it an elective, 1619 or whatever is going to come after that, right? The quote unquote free market will let you know whether or not people want those classes. They will. But I got more to say on that later. So this has been Dr. Philip Fletcher with the Humanity Matters broadcast and podcast for this extended episode today. Paul said, if it's an elective, won't it still be tax funded? Yes. But over time, if kids are not taking that class, then why offer that class, right? Those tax dollars could be used elsewhere. So by making it an elective, it puts it back on the school district and their administrators to really look at which classes do we need to be teaching and which classes we don't. But then more so, again, I just think schools need to be focusing on reading and writing and math, because like reading and like math, we're like suffering here in Arkansas. And it should be the responsibility of learning this stuff at home or in some particular group that you're freely associating with. So trying to find a middle ground, Paul, trying to find a middle ground. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today at the Humanity Matters broadcast and podcast. Hey, check out my website, philipfletcher.org, philipfletcher.org. Go to YouTube and subscribe. I would appreciate you subscribing, just checking out a video. It would go a long way. Subscribe to the Humanity Matters podcast. You can find it on all your podcast outlets, iTunes, Spotify, Google, all the good places, or anchor.fm. If you got an email me, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com, humanitymatterspodcast@gmail.com. And then, hey, I'm always looking for sponsors, right? If I'm giving you any type of value whatsoever, hey, you can PayPal me, pfletcher73@gmail.com. Helps me pay for streaming across multiple platforms, improving equipment. Hope my lighting is better. Hey, y'all see the new Yoda I got? The baby Yoda? Can't wait to get to work on that. So all that good stuff. So as always, remember to be loved, to be kind, and to be generous. And if we remember to live in hope, we can do the impossible. Y'all take care and God bless.